What's going on? We're doing a breakdown of Forget Me Nots by Patrice Rushen. Such a good track, sampled by many, probably most famously Men in Black. Used the exact bass line, played by Freddie Washington. Freddie Washington. Freddie Washington. Here we go. Here's the original. Here's my recreation. Cool, original. Here's my recreation. This was a tricky one. I isolated the vocal, but it didn't really do a very good job. I had to kind of go in by hand using RX and trim the stuff out around the vocals, and that always... I think what happened was the original vocal in the mix, it's a little down in the mix, so... You know, the isolators that are doing the vocal stuff couldn't quite grab it. So there's a lot of stuff. Here's the isolated vocal. You'll hear it's a little, aliasy and artifacty. Yeah, not great. So I tried to get rid of any of the extra pops and stuff, but still useful to have a bit of a vocal there to hear where the kind of general space it takes up in the mix, and then you can place your instruments at the right place in the mix against that vocal, even if the vocal isn't really good quality. So here's mine without the vocal. That's it. And please forgive any CPU problems. I actually had to disable a couple things while I'm recording. I disabled just the clipping program, which doesn't make that big of a difference for our purposes. But I run clipping at a really high over-aliasing. Actually, only ×8. Check it out. I can zoom in. ×8. Sometimes I'll run that at 16. Basically, whatever headroom I have left on my CPU, I'll run my final plugins at as high quality as possible. Just because digital aliasing is real. That's why. Okay, we're gonna throw our metric AB up on the other screen, and I will tell you when I'm switching back and forth. We're going to go through the instruments. Here's the drums. Okay, so a big thing I want to talk about today, kind of like the last one we did, is reverb, matching the reverbs. On the Prince tune that I did last, the reverbs were really important. And same with this, there's that nice reverb tail on the clap, and then I think it's a clap driving the reverb, but we don't actually hear the clap that clearly. And I got the result by using an 808 clap and driving it into a plate and then gating it. That's just how I did it. It seems like I'm getting good results that way because I think the plate has so much harmonic content that I can shape it. Whereas if it's a real character reverb, one of the digital reverbs that they probably actually did use, it's just easier for me to sculpt the plate because I think it's more rich, so I can pull what I need out of it. And I don't know exactly what they used in the original studio, and I care more about just matching it than using the exact gear. I will use the exact gear if I can, if it works, but I'm more concerned with the sound than anything. Okay, that was the drums. Here are the hats. So the hats are actually a combination. I've got them bussed to a subgroup, a bus within a bus for the drums. I've got these hats, which are the acoustic, kind of really high pitched, I think Paisley hi-hats. The hats are very high frequencies in this mix. Let's listen to the original. Check out how high the hats sit. They're like way up there. It's like really high, which is nice. It's a good technique because it gets the hats out of the way of the other elements. But just that hi-hat alone wasn't enough. Like it was still too natural sounding, and I wanted more of that noise in the top end, almost like a shaker. If we listen, you can almost hear like this like sh 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 effect going on with some kind of a hi-hat or shaker up in the top end, and it's doubling the hi-hat like almost perfectly. So check it out. That sound is kind of happening there. So I'm using that hi-hat, and then I'm doubling it with, I think it's a Simmons hi-hat. It just had the right texture. Oh, let me mute it, or solo it, sorry. Oh, yeah, that's right. That's the original. This is mine. Here it is. That's the Simmons hi-hat. And as you can hear, I shaved the attack off of it. Let's take a look at it, what I did. I use this technique all the time. If a hat is sounding way too close, this is a big thing with software plugins. Hats can sound really like really sharp. Let's adjust it. Check it out. So that's like, if I bring this attack back, you'll hear it get way closer. It's like right up, like next to your eyeball. And a lot of times that just takes up way too much presence in space, and that high end can be more like more like a shaker, you know. Somewhere around there. Okay, kick. Yeah, it's great. So it's, you know, it's being played in by a real drummer, and I tried to retain some of that humanness. You know, I didn't quantize everything. I left as long as it grooves in context of the whole band. You know, that's what I'm looking for. But you can hear it's not perfectly even. What did I use on the kick here? Let's look at the buzzing is crazy. Okay. We're looking at the kick. By the way, I did the same thing on the natural hi-hat. I pulled that attack back a little bit because it was just a little too present sounding. We're going to look at the kick. These are my settings. What happened with the kick? You know, it was more just trying to, there isn't too much like low end thump. There's a bit of like sub, but there's not a lot of like 150 where like the punch of a kick can usually sit. And it has like a nice amount of tone, the original. It's like a do, like the sustained tone is kind of in there. There's also a bit of that cardboardy effect where like you hear the beater. It's not a clicky, it's not a clicky thing, but there's like a beater thing. Solo it. There you are. Okay. So there's actually quite a bit of stuff going on this kick. I saturated it, and I'm not saturating the bottom end because that's, well, I am a little bit, but not as aggressively, because that'll kind of just change the whole structure of the kick. These are the loudest harmonics down here. So if I saturate that as hard as I saturate this stuff, if I saturate the bottom as much as I saturate the other bands, the whole thing will kind of shift and change. It's not a bad thing, but I liked the sound of the kick, so I didn't want to change that. But I am saturating harder in the mid range and the top range just to bring a bit more of the chunky attack sounds out of the kick, make it a little bit more noticeable in the mix. Here's with it. Here's without it. Okay, so, you know, some might say like, oh, I like how punchy it is without it. And it's like, yeah, it is definitely more focused in the bottom end. But to me, like this mid-range, like the attack kind of clarity is what's going to make that kick really noticeable in the mid-range on like normal speakers. You know, if you don't have great speakers or really good headphones, that kick just becomes less noticeable. And the original has that too, so we'll listen to that. Yeah. All right. Next up on the kick list, phosphat again. I just wanted that extra little click on the kick, and I've been using this a lot lately to get that effect. It's pretty subtle, and it's not too clicky sounding, but it just adds a little bit of noise on the front end of the kick. So here's with it. Here's without it. That's pretty noticeable. It really adds, like, it's almost like almost like a hi-hat or something attached to it, but it sounds like the beater, and it's not too clicky. I use a very narrow band to generate that noise, and this oscillator is just completely off, but you can generate like sub low end with this thing as well. I just have that off, and I've got the noise up, and the release is as short as it can go. I kind of wish it could go even shorter, to be honest, but I kind of get what I'm looking for with the attack all the way down and the release all the way down for this effect. Okay. Then I'm using a little bit of knock just for a small amount of sub content. That's the sub content I was talking about earlier. The kick didn't quite have quite enough, and I just tuned this so it was, you know, working with the kick, not against it. Sometimes you can pick a frequency here and it'll actually cancel out the low end that you have in your sample. So, you know, fine tune it, listen to the original, go back and forth, try to get a similar sound from it. Okay. Oh, this is like actually crazy. And I'm pretty sure I might be wrong here, but the original recording, I can hear the click track in the head, like bleeding through headphones. And I think it's because of all the clap tracks that they used. I think they had like, it sounds like they've got at least like 6 clap tracks. And the more clap tracks you have and the more you compress those, and they're also bright clap tracks. Like they brighten them and compress them. And it brings the headphone noise through whatever mic they used. And you can hear the click. Like, check it out. Check out the original. It's totally there. So I use like the instrument that Logic uses to generate clicks, which is called Klopfgeist. It's this plugin. And I actually put a click back in, and I tuned it closely to what the click they used in the studio kind of sounded like. But check out my click. Oop, that's the original. Here's mine. Okay. Now listen for that in the original. It's totally there. There's totally click bleeding through the headphones. But it grooves. That's the thing. I was trying to figure out, I thought it was coming from the kick, and then there's a few moments where it's like, it's staggered, and it's like, it's not being generated by the kick. It's coming from somewhere else. And then I realized, like, oh, all the clap tracks, they were listening to click through the headphones when they did the clap tracks. And I mean, it may have been something else. It didn't necessarily, it could have been something else other than the clap tracks. But there is definitely click bleeding through some headphones or something. Okay, what's up next? the snare. There's like a rattly snare sound inside the main snare effect of this track, but this track isn't driven by snare drum. It's driven by claps. The claps are the snare drum. So check it out. Check out the claps. All about the claps. That's where all the punch is coming from. The snare is just giving some texture underneath it. So if we listen to my snare, this is the texture that's kind of under there. I just needed a bit of rattly stuff. It doesn't even look like that's doing anything. Oh, wait. Wrong one. This should be doing something. Yeah, there we go. Just pulling out some of the body and dipping down a few of the resonances that I didn't like. Just to get as much of that like kind of texture as possible from the snare. I didn't necessarily need the body of the snare to fill out that sound. Let's look at the claps. This is big on this track. Claps were huge. Claps and the bass are the two big things. So, claps. That's all the claps together. This is a combination of 3 groups. We have our kind of main snare-like claps that are kind of, which is a 4 claps, I think, 3 or 4, yeah. All playing with like quite a bit of looseness. Sound like this. This is Hand Clap Studio. It's just it doesn't always work. I was prepared to just record the claps, but when this works, it's so good. It saves so much time. It's amazing. Just editing wise, you don't have to clean up like 8 tracks of claps, and it's just so clean, and it's well recorded, and you have a condenser and a ribbon mic to go through. The compressor works well. I'm rambling. That's for like the chunky clap, I would say. It's like back a bit in the mix, but it's functioning as the snare drum. It's got a bit of punch. Then there's a second clap layer that I think they overdubbed just for the doubles. Right? That's a separate track, and it's up closer, and it has more of a transient on it. So check that one out. Actually, let's listen for that in the original. Listen for the the double clap. It's a different clap track, and it's up front. Being processed differently. Hear it? It's like right up here. So they used probably a compressor or something just to pull the attack out of it, and then I did it in a slightly different way, but I still have a compressor on there. But here's mine. Okay. And in context, you can hear it. Okay, so you can hear it jumps up front just for that double clap. To process this, you know what? Let's go through all the types of claps first. The last clap is actually not as noticeable in the mix, but it's driving the reverb. And I sort of used an 808 style clap. So yeah, this is actually way down. The dry is barely being heard, but I'm sending it to a plate verb with a gate on it. And this is really where we're getting our kind of sound. I don't know if that's what they did in the studio. I assume they probably drove it from the actual claps, or maybe like these wide claps, not the close claps. But for whatever reason, I just wasn't pushing the reverb in the way I wanted to, and I wasn't getting the harmonics from it that I needed. So I just found a combination of a certain plate and a certain clap sound that gave me those harmonics in the top end, and I was able to EQ it. So let's talk about that, how I set that up. Just like how we have gain staging, I kind of think about like EQ staging as well for this type of thing, because we're not really hearing that clap dry. We're just using it to push into a reverb and like generate harmonics for a reverb. So we can kind of push certain frequencies to affect the reverb more before it even hits the reverb, right? And then we can EQ after the reverb as well. So if we go to that send, here's the send going out to our bus, and I'm using this awesome plate. I think I'm going to buy this because I just went through a bunch of them, and this got me there very quickly, and it's been proving very useful lately. So I'm going to end up buying this, I think. It's just a very nice plate verb that is smooth but also has a nice character. And I find a lot of like kind of character reverbs like this have like some stuff that it adds resonances sometimes because that's what the original did, and sometimes you end up cleaning up more than you should. This one has a nice balance, I think. Yeah, that's the reverb. Then looks like I'm compressing it a little bit to bring some of the body out of the reverb. Cool. That's compressing the body a bit. Then here we have the gate, which is really important. This is the logic gate. Sometimes I use the Oxford one. This one, if this one works, I'll take it because it's lower CPU usage, and it works really well when it works. So I'm triggering the sidechain from the clap, which is not the actual clap that the sound is coming from. I'm generating it from the wide clap sound. For whatever reason, I think it just worked well. It triggered the gate well, and the open and close was at the right rate. With gates, let's listen to it. And see it opening and then trailing off. So it's not an aggressive gate. It's like a very natural sounding gate. And I think when people think about gates, they think of like on off, kind of like that. And that isn't necessarily what you have to use a gate for. You can have a natural sounding gate with like a natural, and it's you can use a gate just to control the dynamics of something the same way you use a compressor. And it's especially useful on reverbs to get a reverb exactly where you want it decay-wise in the mix. And after I put stuff on the master, a lot of times the reverbs jump out of the mix, right? So it's really helpful to be able to go back and further shape that reverb to like groove with the song. Some of the mastering and some of the master bus effects, the compression on the master bus might pull that reverb up way too much and you lose the groove in the reverb. So it's nice to be able to go back and further sculpt. All right. Zoom out here. What's next? Okay, the plate is very good and very wide, but I needed a bit more width compared to the original. So here's the plate without it, the gated plate. And with it, yeah. Yeah. This plugin is so good because it's very subtle, but it really will add like ambience to a sound, like natural ambience. It's not overdone. It's a great way to spread out a reverb or any source. Just need a little bit more width. You don't want to like mess with the stereo image or too much phase stuff. It does a really natural job. Okay, so this is what I'm talking about with pre and post EQ, driving into reverbs like this. So you EQ the part going into the reverb to pull the harmonics out of the reverb that you want, and then you tidy it up again after. So further sculpting here on the backside. So with it, without it, with it, Without, yeah, just a bit more clarity here, and then a bit more of that like sound around like 1K. All right, that's all for that reverb, I think. Is there anything else? That's it, yeah. By the way, I always, as I'm creating sounds and before I get to the mix stage, I rarely use these faders here. I always use these utility gains because it keeps the session nice and clean, and I can keep all my faders at 0. And then when it gets to the end of the mix, I can then go to the faders and like pull things up and down by like 1 or 2 dB. And I can actually automate the utilities before. If you automate these and it's a big mess, you got to open up the automation lanes anytime you want to make an adjustment. And it's just like, no, I just want to bring that down. I want to bring this up. As you push the mix a bit harder, you just have to make those little adjustments. And I don't want to be going into automation lanes to do that. So I do the automation lanes before with the gain utility. So I automate that gain knob in the gain utility instead of the volume knob. Gain utility should always be in the last in the chain. So it's basically a volume knob, same as this fader. Okay, high strings. This was a cool sound. Let's listen to the original. So cool. Okay. I ended up doing this using 2 synths summed together on a bus. I'll just label this. They're the Juno 106 clones. Pretty simple patch. Filters wide open. Just a quick ding, ding, ding. Here, I'll play it really quick. And one is an octave, and then the next one is a higher octave. I heard like this more of a shimmer from it. At first, I just had this. And it was close. I like the texture. I like the combination of the square wave and the saw wave. With the effects, it sounded pretty good. But then I realized there's an upper harmonic happening. Like there's like this really high. So it's like I'll mix in the higher octave. So check it out with the high octave. Yeah, it just adds a bit of clarity. That's with it. That's without it. Here. With it. Yeah, it kind of, and it also hits the reverb in a nice way. The reverb kind of shimmers a bit more with that upper octave. Those little details in the harmonics, like just pulling, however you can pull a bit of extra harmonic content out of a sound without EQing, like aggressively. I find the sound of EQ is just like, you can hear that you're trying to push a sound in an unnatural way. So if you can do it at the source, do it at the source, I could have just gone with that first high synth sound and pushed the top EQ up, but it wouldn't have been quite the same. It all of a sudden would start to sound a little unnatural, but when you just layer 2 together, you get that top end, a bit of that extra sparkle, and now all of a sudden it's like kind of pops out of the mix, which is what I really wanted. It wasn't quite popping out of the mix enough. And the original one really sticks out of the mix. It's like bang, bang, bang. It's really nice. Okay, let's talk about how I got that panning to happen. There'd be different ways to do this for sure. There's definitely different ways to do this. So the way I ended up doing it, you could just use a synth that has like a pan feature on it. So every time you play a note, it goes right, left, right, left. You could totally do that. I'm pretty sure they were using a ping pong delay of some sort. But for whatever reason, I was just kind of lazy, and I was like, I just want the sound to go gang, 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 back and forth. So on each of these high strings, I just put a tempo synced tremolo, just like a square wave. So it just goes left, right, left, right, left on each quarter note. So it'll flip back and forth. That's on both of the strings, like right at the source before any of the extra processing. Now there's quite a bit of processing on this to add like that reverb, ambience, and that delay as well. Because there's really only one note being played. There's only one note being played. It just goes ding, 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 and those are all delays after that first initial note. Here's my first EQ stage. There isn't really anything down here, so there's a tiny bit of rumble, I think, happening down here from like some kind of aliasing synth noise, so I just took it out. Or maybe from one of the effects, actually. Could have been. No, it would have been from the synth because it's first in the chain. All right, Saturn. Just pushing those harmonics. It needed quite a bit because the signal's pretty low. With it, without it, with it. Yeah, just pulling a bit of extra harmonic content out of it, and then I think I gain staged it a bit. Yep, -1. It sounds a bit quieter. Then I'm hitting the drum shaper to pull out the attack. It's cool. And then this mojo knob is just an EQ. I sometimes I'll just try it, and if I like it, I'll leave it. I don't think the soft clipper is doing anything. H delay. Probably my favorite delay for this type of effect. So easy to dial in. Has some nice analog stuff if you want it. I have it off because I wanted it to be clean. But you gotta be careful with this analog thing too, because it adds a bit of noise to the dry source as well. So if you're mixing it in. So I have it set up in ping pong mode, so it will go back and forth. So sometimes it works with the panner, and sometimes it works against the panner, so then you just hear it in mono. If you catch it at the right time... Oh, mono. Try it this time. Let's see. Okay, I'm not sure why it's not syncing now, but maybe if actually turn it off, we'll see. No, whatever. Doesn't matter. For whatever reason, I think it's just a sync thing. If it catches it when it's at the other side, and then this starts on the other side, it'll just basically make it mono. But when it works, it sounds great. Okay, so that's the H delay. Then some gain staging. I'm bringing it down. And then I'm running it through a plate. And I could have sent it here. Okay, here's a big thing. I think a lot of people think of like their plate, like that snare plate, as like, oh, just send it to the snare plate. I've already got a plate open. It's like, that's a bad idea, because that plate is working with the snare for the groove. So that's just for the snare. That's like a special plate just for the snare. I could have sent this to a bus and had a nice like synth bus or something for the plate, but there's no other synth element on this track, so I just put it right on this track. It'll make it easier later when I have to bounce out stems. So, yep, that's where I put it. And that plate, again, I love this plate. I think it's really nice. With it, without it. Adding quite a bit. Nice amount of sustain. All right. That's the synth. Let's talk about the Rhodes. Okay, so this Rhodes is the Rhodes V8 Pro, which is made by Rhodes itself, the company that makes the real Rhodes. It's a model of their newest Rhodes, and it looks amazing. I really want one, but I don't know if that's ever going to happen because they're quite expensive. Rhodes, if you're hearing this, please hook me up or something. I don't know. I need one of these. They're amazing. What's really cool in the plugin though is they did a really good job with this plugin, and all the effects on the front panel here are the same effects that they have on the effect version of the real Rhodes. So, and I think they modeled them really well. These are all really good effects. They're just dialed in so well for the Rhodes. Pretty much what I go to all the time now. I've got a couple other really good Rhodes sample libraries as well, but this one's just so good. I also went in and like tuned like the tuning lane that you can like tune each. Here, I'll zoom in so you can see it. You can like microscopically tune each note. So if it there was I think it was the flat 7, the E in this tune was like sounding a little sharp, was just sticking out a bit too much, more than the original, and I went in and like detuned it to like fit in the voicing. So yeah, so you can actually kind of get into that level of stuff. You can also adjust the pickup position, not the time, the pickup position, where it is, how close it is to the tine, so you can brighten it up or mellow it out a bit to match stuff. So you can just get so close with something like this. I have a phaser on it. I was trying to get the chorus to work on here, but when you turn it on, it just right away gets really wide, and I couldn't find a mix on the chorus. I wish they gave you a mix. That's one thing they could do. Maybe it's there and I just don't know about it. But when it's on, it instantly kind of gets too wide for this track. Sometimes this chorus is amazing. All right. Yeah, no delay here, but it's the phaser inside here, a little bit of the pan, a bit of drive. That's about it. And then I'm running it through Sketch Cassette to kind of like just like I was finding here's without it. Here's with it. Without it, it was just feeling a bit too present, too close, and I'm a keyboard player, so I have to be careful not to put keyboards really like way too high in the mix, because that's what my ear always goes to first. Is the harmony, and I want to push that because it's like that's what I tune into usually first. So I always have to kind of check myself and be like, I'm a keyboard player. Be careful, like it's in my nature to want to bring that more present and really showcase the harmony. But try to just listen to the original, match it. It's further back, and without this, it was sounding a little too crisp, and this kind of helps make it a bit more lo-fi. As we know, when we get rid of high frequencies, things sound like they're going back a little bit in the mix. So I just wanted to do that in a nice natural way while, maybe getting a little bit of tape saturation. It just kind of went back a little bit. That is all I used it for. Then I'm EQing a little bit, pulling out some of that 300, which is a big frequency for Rhodes. With that band, without the band. Yeah. So that's where a lot of the warmth in the Rhodes comes from, and a lot of times you want that warmth, but this track's pretty full, and the bass is right in this frequency range too. We're gonna see it later, and it was just too much warmth. It wasn't matching the original. This is more of what I would call like an E piano Rhodes sound. That it's still warm, but it has more of the gurgly 8 to 1K stuff going on. It's a little bit kind of crisper. and it, it fits back kind of off to the sides in the mix, kind of back. Yeah. But if you want to warm up a Rhodes, if the Rhodes is like the feature instrument, that's where you would go to like pull that warmth out of the instrument. Okay, next up. Oh, sorry, and then I'm hitting it with the Roland chorus, which is an emulation of the Juno 106 chorus or the Juno 60 chorus. And it's barely doing anything. I just wanted a little bit, again, a little bit washier, a little bit further back in the mix. Barely in there. I have another reverb send, which is I usually have on these types of mixes where we're emulating instruments in a room. I usually have a room send. So I'm sending the Rhodes, and I should have mentioned I'm also sending the drums to this reverb send. Let's listen to it. Okay, that's just the room send. And it puts the instruments in a place, which is so important to make your mix not sound like it was done in a DAW. Right, this is just what would happen naturally in the studio. You would get bleed from other instruments if they're playing in the same room. If the drums weren't perfectly isolated, you'd get a little bleed in the other instruments. Like, this is the kind of stuff that just builds up in a mix, and it actually adds to the vibe, in a really nice way. So anything that I know is something that fits back in the mix, I'll send it to this room a little bit too, just to give it a bit of like extra air. Very subtle, but when you put a bunch of things through it, it starts to add up. Okay. We got this slap bass. All right. The slap bass sound, definitely I put the most amount of time into it. Freddie Washington just killed it on this track. I posted a video on Instagram. It's on YouTube of him playing along with it, just like he's playing the track off his iPhone, and he's just perfectly playing along with it. It's ridiculous. Like, it's insanely tight. Definitely check that out. I got as close as I could. This was really hard. There's a few sections where I know it's still not quite right, but I think it kind of fulfills the purpose. And actually, after posting it, and I heard it on my phone off that little like band of high frequencies you get on your phone, I realized I could have pushed the top end a little bit more, just to bring a bit more presence out of it. So I think I've already done that, but here's mine. Okay, so we're using Bass Slapper from Waves. And I have a whole bunch of really good electric bass plugins. I'm pretty sure he's playing a J bass in the original, because I think a P bass is too dark. It sounds like it's a J bass. And this obviously isn't a J bass, but I needed a library that had only slap, that was a bit more detailed, just in the slap department. I needed more velocity levels, just a bit more control over it. So I found this was the best starting place as just a dry signal source, and then I could pull what the harmonics I needed from it. It's a good plugin. It's really good. I probably could. I don't know. I think I found most of the articulations, but I'm sure if I used it more, I would probably find even more articulations, and realized I had to do one kind of tricky thing, which was this bass slide here. Check it out. I'm going to close this momentarily. Check this out. There's a bass slide here that is okay. It's so short. I can't believe I actually did this, but the bass slide in the patch. Let's see if I can find it here. There it is. Okay. That's coming from Bass Slapper. And there's a couple fall offs in the recording where you get this quick boom, like really fast. And this is just too long. That articulation's too long, and it's it also happens right at the attack, and I need it to go boom and then just drop, like so, sustain and then drop. So I sampled this, bounced it out to audio, and then played the original sustain note, and then faded into my boom, which I have time stretched shorter. So it's not, it's like boom, and it drops. So check it out. Right? Boom, boom. I just needed that effect. I thought it was important. It's a lot of messing around with velocity levels. And I should also mention that anytime I use a bass plugin, I'm always looking for velocity to volume curves. And this Waves, if you're listening, this should be a little bit more aggressive. It does it. So basically when you play louder on the piano, higher velocity, the sound is louder. When you play quieter, the sound is quieter, usually, right? That's what happens. So you can exaggerate that by going up and making the loud notes even louder and the quiet notes even quieter. Or you can have the opposite effect where when you play quieter, the notes stay the same volume, right? The quieter notes get louder and the loud notes kind of stay at the same volume. So I kind of see this as free compression, like rather than keeping this really dynamic and then slamming it with a compressor, which can, make it all of a sudden sound like you're using a compressor. This to me is like free compression. And it sounds pretty natural. So you tune it. Like I said, I think the effect of this is limited in Waves. I wish it went down further to even bring the low notes up even more. I'm not sure why they kind of limited that there, but in Omnisphere you can set it so even if you just barely play the note, it's like boom, it's like up at the same volume, which allows you to mess with the tone of the instrument too. Okay. Bass is hitting Saturn. I wanted to bring more of the sustain out of the bass because it was very punchy sounding, more punchy than the original bass. The original bass had a nice like light slap and then just like a sustain. And this still doesn't quite have it, but I got it a bit closer with this. You'll hear it just becomes more like bang, bang, more punchy kind of without it. And then with it, it just kind of evens it out a bit. So without it. Now with it. Yeah. Very subtle, but I think it helped a little bit. This is doing a similar thing. I've talked about this plugin before. I have an analog plugin that does something similar with the APB. They just added a saturator for the APB by McDSP, which is like an analog plugin thing, which lets you focus a saturation band in a certain place. And I think it's really a valuable thing. If I need to just add a bit of body to a sound or there's something kind of missing, you have the option to add your odd or even harmonics. Here are my settings. So I'll do that really quick. And this is just mixed in, about 50-50. I kind of just look for the frequency range. I have it set to band, so the saturation's hitting a certain band more. I like to do this more than EQ. So I think a lot of people would turn to EQ first and I'd rather do this because this sounds more natural to me, and it's pulling detail out of a certain frequency band more than just forcing the exact harmonics that are already there up. This feels like kind of a better way to generally shape something. If you need to carve, then an EQ is probably best, but if you're just looking to kind of shape, get a different character out of a sound, I'll go for a band-based saturator like this. Find that thing that I'm looking for, and then mix the dry back in. So use it in parallel. All right. The bass slide sound, we covered that. Is there anything else? I don't know if there is anything else. I think that's pretty much it. Oh yeah, the master bus. Okay. So everything's getting sent to our stereo bus. And there's a few stages, right? Like we had a bus within a bus for the drums and the hi-hats and the claps. So I have a chance to process at the drum stage, which I don't think I talked about. Yeah, we didn't talk about it. I'm adding a bit of punch on the drums. Pulling back on the sustain, adding a little bit of mojo, which is just an EQ curve that, it's probably just top end and low end. Then I'm using a little bit of tape. This is just the factory setting. Just adds a subtle amount of tape, kind of like what Saturn would do by FabFilter. This is a good plugin though. Okay. Oh, and then I'm clipping here just to grab some of those really high transients. Oh yeah, I'm not too high gain. I mixed pretty low on this one, so I had to pull the clip down quite a bit. Actually, it looks like I may have eased up on it to the point where it's not really doing anything at all. That's funny. I am clipping later though to control some peaks. Okay, but yeah, I will control peaks at earlier stages, which is a good idea for kind of transparency. So your compressors down the line don't have to work quite so hard. They're not going to get caught by just those tiny little sample peaks, which if a little sample is spiking way higher and your compressor's coming, it's forcing your compressor to move the needle like way more than it needs to, right? If you just shave that 5 sample peak off, it's like now your compressor is just easy, it's not working quite so hard. You won't hear the compression. It's free headroom. Okay, that's what's on the drums. We're talking about the stereo. First up is the tape recorder, the Studer. Little bit of gain input, but as you can see, the needle is not getting too high. I tried, this is why I mixed low, so that if my mix was coming in hotter than this, I'd have to put a gain stage before this, because I'm gaining this up, and I tried actually turning up the input and bringing down the output, and it was doing a bit too much. It was a bit too much tape saturation, and I was losing the dynamic punch. Okay. Next up is my Capital mastering compressor. Oh man, I love this thing. This thing is so good. And as usual, I'm pulling that shape down just a bit, so it's not, if you go up, I think it brings out more of the high end. It pushes some of the crispier top end stuff, excites the mix a bit. I don't know exactly what this shape is doing, but maybe it's just the shape of the hard clipper versus a soft clipper. I don't know, or the knee shape maybe. I'm not sure. But it definitely does something when you turn it. It'll do something. Here, I'll show you. Check it out. There's a harder edge to the transients. Okay, so yeah, I turned that on. That's saturating. Full mix. Wow. I really wanted it there, I guess. That plugin is so good, man. It's so natural. I don't know what they did, but they nailed it. Okay, I'm adding more saturation here. Subtle saturation using Saturn 2. Why? Why did I do this? Because I needed more dynamic punch out of the mix. That's what I wanted. My original here's without it. Here's with it. Okay. So the cool thing about Saturn 2 is each band, you have a dry wet mix on each band. So you have like a parallel saturator on every single band, and then you also have a parallel saturator on the master. So it's kind of mind-boggling the amount of stuff you can do, but I wanted more punch. So in the dynamic section here let me zoom in. In the dynamic section of this plugin, I basically, you turn it down to the left, it's a transient shaper. And then you can drive into that transient shaper, which is so valuable. I wish more saturation plugins have a transient shaper before the drive so that you can saturate the transients more or saturate the sustain more. So if you go to the other side here, you get the sustain. So you can saturate the length of the note. If you go to the left, you'll saturate just the punch of the note. Problem with this is now your mix is just going to sound like punchy and you'll lose the energy from the sustain. So what you do is you bring the mix back in. You mix the dry back in with the punchy, saturated stuff. And it's really fun to find a balance. The drive will maybe remove some low end, so as you bring the dry back in, you can. But also that's why they gave us these tone bands here. So as you drive stuff, you might lose a bit of low end or a bit of mid presence, so you can dial it back into the saturation, and then again mix the dry in with it. And I have various settings throughout. Top end is full saturation, I guess, because I just wanted more crispy top end. This one has way less, just a bit of the saturated, punchy. It's to the left. It's all to the left. I was looking for a bit more punch. And this looks more aggressive than it is. This warm tape setting on Saturn is actually very nicely tuned in. It's quite subtle. Yeah. So there's that. Getting some punch out of Saturn there. What's after that? Oh, we've got the APB. Okay, cool. So don't always use this, but today I reached for it because I wanted that analog kind of something to boost up some of the subtleties in the mix a bit more. The mix was still sounding a little too digital or something, and I just wanted to make it alive with some transistors. So this is actually analog. To the right of me here is the APB 16, which is by McDSP. It's like 16 channels of analog processing, and you basically just open up a plugin and it routes your audio out to that channel on the APB. If it's stereo, it takes up 2 of the 16 channels, and each time you open a plugin, it takes up another channel. And the plugins do different things. Like this one's a limiter. You can open up a saturator, which I mentioned earlier. I love that saturator. It sounds really good. There's some really nice stereo bus compressors in there, and then there's a summer as well, so you can put it on your instrument groups and then sum them back together on your master. Anyways, very useful, worth checking out. Okay, mastering, like I just need to get this up to a certain level so that it works. And then I'm going back and forth matching. So what am I doing here? Here's with it. Actually, let's hear the APB first. I didn't get to show you what it did. So here's with it. Here's without it. Obviously adding some gain, but I think it also just saturates nicely. Not even moving the needle. I just want some transistors. I want some natural gain from analog equipment. That's what I was looking for. Instead of just gaining up using a gain utility, I want to gain up through some nice transistors and some, like a channel strip on a nice console. Okay, here's ozone. Here's with it. Let's use gain match and then bypass it that way. Let me gain this up so we can hear the difference. Here we go. Here's gain matched. That's with it. It's without it. Cool. Now we're going to put this back. I have this down just to match the levels for the OBS input. Just the master output of the whole DAW. So like after this plugin, there's this master fader, which is the same as this. So it's just what the software outputs. All right. Equalizer up front. Impact. Impact is really cool in ozone. What I've been doing lately is I go through bands and I use impact as like a groove thing. So I want to dial it into a place where each band is just like grooving with like punchy information. Not necessarily punchy information. It can be kind of like wh as well, as long as it's grooving. You dial it into a place where it's grooving. So check out each band. Right, here's the impact. If I bring this up, check out what happens. There's like all this extra. There's some little transient things that aren't as funky, and I just want that, especially in the bottom end. Like I just want that quarter note thump down there. Yeah, totally. Next band, let's hear how it grooves. Okay, so if it was up here, check it out. Yeah, I like it down here. Just feels right. So there's like two different ways to get impact with this thing. Down is going to be less punchy, but it'll still control like the groove, like a compressor almost. It leaves the attack in a nice way. So you get like two types of like impact control. Up is like the punchy version, and down is like the sort of controlled, like we're like kind of just pumping the mix in a nice subtle way. Next band. I left it right down the middle. Top band. Right? We'll bring it up and we'll hear. Yeah, I thought it was too pokey sounding up there. And then if you go delta, we can hear exactly what it's adding to the mix, like what it's changed. Sorry, I have to mute that. Yeah. That might be kind of hard to hear, but it is like just adding a little, you know, it's very subtle, but it does something. Here's the imager. I just listened to the original, matched it. Clarity, same thing. A being back and forth. This is not doing much. What's going on here with this stuff? Yeah, just back and forth. Slow, just checking. Not being too aggressive with everything. At this point, it should sound like the song. So all this is doing is just matching general width. Maybe just make it a bit wider, or like, you know, match it. If it's too wide, bring it in a bit in certain bands, you know. Very subtle stuff. Controlling some resonance peaks that were popping out. The maximizer is bringing it up to a decent level that I thought was competitive with the original. These older mixes, you know, they're not -8 mixes. They're not even -10 mixes sometimes. They're very like nice dynamic mixes. And I found like this was kind of match-wise, this is where it was sounding really, really nice. Yeah. So that's it. Hopefully, I don't know if anybody got through that. If somebody watches all of this, I am very impressed. But thanks for watching. I appreciate it. And there's more to come. Stay tuned. Head over to Instagram to see when I post stuff right away. If enough people like it, I usually make a quick instructional thing. I wouldn't call this quick. This is not quick. Also, I got this sweet Long McQuaid t-shirt. Check it out. I basically have a reverse sponsorship with Long McQuaid. That's where I pay Long McQuaid. Like, I give them all my money because I'm a musician and I buy gear all the time because I'm addicted to buying gear. So I give them all my money and I advertise for them for free. So it's like a reverse sponsorship. You know, a sponsorship is when like they give you products for free as long as you advertise for them. Well, I pay them and I advertise for them. So it's kind of like the opposite of that. It's sort of like a sponsorship, I guess. Anyways, see you guys later. Bye.